But when something happens, it's the neighbor who's there to help pull their friend or their neighbor out of the rubble or to give them shelter, to provide food, to make food. And I think it does bring out the best of humanity when you see something happen anywhere in the world. That is the case. It can either bring out the best or the worst in us.
My name is Itty Abraham. I'm a professor in the School for the Future of Innovation in Society here at Arizona State University. My research interests lie at the intersection of international relations and critical technology studies. And I'm here today to talk about US-Asia relations, which have been going through a lot of change and turmoil recently, and we're hoping to make some sense of it that I hope you'll enjoy listening to us.
My name is Holly Solberg. I work at Arizona State University in the International Development Initiative. I'm the Senior Director of Global Implementation and Impact, which is a mouthful. But essentially, our team works on identifying and implementing sponsored projects that are aimed at addressing and tackling global development issues. I also just recently started working with the School for the Future of Innovation in Society.
But Holly, you're also somebody who has a lot of experience traveling around different parts of Asia. Can you say something about that?
So my career started actually as a Peace Corps volunteer after I graduated from California Lutheran University. And so I was fortunate enough to find a job with CARE International. And through that job, I worked in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East over the course of 24 years in varying roles. Specifically, Asia. I lived in Asia between 2005 and 2007. I went there following the massive tsunami of 2004. And I worked a lot then in Thailand, in India, and Sri Lanka, kind of post tsunami recovery, rehabilitation. And I went to Pakistan in 2005. There was a massive earthquake there. So I went to help. Our country program had just started up there. So there were only 4 staff. So I went and spent a month there and helping to put together a response and grow our team and raise money for the response, etc.
That's quite an introduction to Asia because that tsunami is something that kind of went around the world
Yes.
in different ways, right? I mean, both in terms of the kind of people affected, but also the scale of it, which was quite shocking. Some of my work is on nuclear energy, and in the region that they were building a nuclear power plant that I was studying, the word tsunami had never existed before in the Tamil language. And after this, it did. And so that was something that you realize that, it was hard to understand how an event like this could take place, which didn't seem to have any prior warning or there was no history of it. And I guess the same also held for disaster relief. So when you went to these countries, you must have found that the disaster relief infrastructure really needed a lot of work or was not very well developed. Is that right?
So it depends on where you're at. I mean, CARE had been in existence since 1946. One of the things I was working on as well was preparedness plans. Those were more well established in some countries than others. Uh, Pakistan, and everything was done by the government in Pakistan, for example. Everything was done by the government. And in all of these countries and contexts, to work in international development, you need to be invited by the host government, right? So you're always working in partnership with them to some degree. But yes, there was nothing that prepared any of these countries for the scope of that devastation. And it really put emergency preparedness and response much more on the map in that kind of a context. And so that's something that most organizations do work on. Is that in the Philippines the same thing? So Haiyan, um, or Typhoon Yolanda, that was in 2014. And that also, and this is a country that had spent a lot of time on preparedness because it's not a surprise that they're going to have water related crises or situations that can turn into crises. So that is another thing.
So one of the things that I always hear about or read about after huge disasters like this is that often governments aren't ready or prepared for a whole variety of reasons, capacity, funding, or just the ability to know what to do at the right time. And you see civil society and, communities responding in ways that often go beyond what you might have imagined they're able to do. Is that something that you see that actually the not so much first responders, but we see from affected communities a kind of um, hospitality, for want of a better word, to others who've been affected in ways that show maybe could bring out the best of humanity, I'd say.
100%. And they are the first responders as well. Communities, local communities, those that are affected are the first responders, 100% always. They may have, there may be government plans in place, there may be resources pre-positioned, there may be NGOs that are working that are also, they've got a plan should something happen. But when something happens, it's the neighbor who's there to help pull their friend to their neighbor out of the rubble or to give them shelter, to provide food, to make food. It's always that way. And I think it does bring out the best of humanity when you see something happen anywhere in the world. That is the case. It can either bring out the best or the worst in us.
This is strange because when life is normal, we don't always see people behaving in generous ways to each other. But when situations become extreme, it seems like that somehow generates people go back to kind of some origin point and behave much better than they would otherwise. Do you do you find that when these things happen, do they want to just go back to the way things were before, or do these become moments in which kind of new change or new developments they see an opportunity for doing something differently? So I was curious.
I'm envisioning a few different places in Sri Lanka, in India, and in the Philippines as well. So there's a term called "Build Back Better,"
Hmm.
which is is exactly what it means. It is, okay, this has happened. My house that does not have very good infrastructure has been decimated. How can I build back better? How can I build back stronger? And this is one of the areas and the ways in which international development can play a role,
Hmm.
bringing in resources, bringing in people with technical specialization, whether it be in water systems, whether it be in shelter and housing, to make sure that they are perhaps more
Right.
earthquake resistant. Thank you. So I see that a lot. And yes, people want to be safe, right? And if they don't feel safe, then they're never going to feel at home.
Right.
People want to be back in their homes, even if it's a flood prone area where maybe they shouldn't have been there in the first place, right? But that's just human nature.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned I just want to return to a word you threw in there earlier, the technical side of things, right? Because I'm also struck by the fact that these disasters that we're talking about are all, shall we say, post mobile phones or post cell phone technology. I mean, obviously having cell phones now makes these disasters both more global right away. People get to hear about them, and also allows people to connect with friends and family that were have been affected by it. I think, not to mention, people know where to go in terms of where to help and so on. So I guess the cell phones and mobile phone technology, which of course we criticize many times for many reasons, good reasons, also has this absolutely fabulous benefit, right? Which it just allows for people to identify themselves more quickly.
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, even people who might be caught in the rubble, like, right after an earthquake, they are Myanmar, right? People who have phones are able to make contact with them.
Right.
I mean, I'm old enough that I worked before cell phones, or at least before it was they were always accessible and what have you. And so, yes, it has made a big difference. And I think the communications and media is what's also we didn't used to see every disaster that happened, and now so the news you see it because of real time. Somebody is videoing it.
That's right. No, I think of the 2004 tsunami very much in that way. It was a global event, even though it was a local event,
Right.
both because of the cell phones and, people, connected to others. But there were families there from all over the world
Sad.
who were there. It was Christmas time and it was vacation spot. It was Phuket, I remember, being particularly hard hit, right,
Right.
by what happened.
Yeah.
And that brought it home, I think, in a way that it wouldn't have had
For
otherwise.
sure. I think people relating, I mean, that's the thing that brings us together. We are a global community. Globalization is here. You do not put it back in the box. And regardless, like for better and for worse. And when you see something like that happen, and when you maybe know somebody, I mean, we probably all know somebody or somebody who knows somebody who was impacted by that.
That's right. Yeah.
Um, one of the things that I might be interesting would be to actually talk a little bit about there have been many changes in the world this year, right? And so related to foreign assistance and international development and how that impacts it. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about is just how much international development, it's not just aid, it's not charity, right? It is actually a really important diplomacy tool that we are seeing being stripped away from the US. And I think that that is definitely having some impact in terms of US Asian relations, issues around trust, issues around reliability. We talk about some of these disasters. And when assistance, I mean, there are plans that are made, USAID, not perfect, uh, implementing organizations, not perfect, but that assistance and that cooperation made a huge difference to not only saving lives, but also to supporting actual, sustainable development and taking us as a global community towards those sustainable development goals that most countries signed up to. So I just think that that's something that it's something to think about because it's going to really have an impact. It already is having an impact. The US is pretty fixated on China as a rival. Well, there's a gap and they are coming in to fill it. I personally think there's plenty to be done and we can all work together. And so why do we, but I'm not a politician and that is not my area. But I think that it's something that is really, we're seeing the impact. I mean, globally, the estimates are that with USAID cuts, like they cut 83%, I think it is, of all of their funding. So it's like $7 billion for this year. Some estimates are that nearly 300,000 people have already died this year as a result of that, due to it's just absolute like immediate stop. This isn't Asia specific, but stops to HIV, malaria, tuberculosis, other health related vaccines. Um, on the humanitarian assistance side, I have a friend who worked for the U.S. government in Asia, and her job was to go deploy and go come up with a plan, a response plan to support. Um, they could say this was following January 20th. They had only a few people to send and very little money to apply to support this response. So what do people see? They also see that the US isn't there anymore and the US has pulled out drastically and rapidly. And I think in terms of that diplomacy, it's going to take decades to rebuild. And so I think that that's just something that's really important to keep in mind.
I think you've raised a really important issue, and I think that in the IR international relations field, sometimes these things are called public diplomacy,
Yeah.
and sometimes they're called soft power,
Right.
which is neither of those words is perfect, but I think we get a sense of what that means. And I think you're absolutely right to highlight the immediate effect of the withdrawal of the money, in terms of the literally people passing away because they no longer have access to medicines, or sometimes something as simple as just fluid to keep you hydrated, or other access to primary healthcare and so on. And I think that the real cost beyond those in the immediate costs of those who were affected by this is going to come in what we think of as reputational costs. And the question of trust, exactly as you put your finger on. Because I think what anyone who studies diplomacy of foreign relations field knows that, when countries want to get stuff done, there's a variety of ways of doing that. And the last thing that you want to do is go and say to somebody, do this or else, because that puts their back up. And, that's just not a way of, even when you're dealing with people, that's not the best way of getting things done. And I think what the United States had always done since 1945, or since the end of the war, and when they became the single global power that really is the one that mattered, people had come to rely on the United States not just for material aid, but as a kind of a beacon of some kind, as a place that you could trust, as a country that you felt that, okay, they didn't always do the right things, but they had the right spirit, or they had the right impetus behind what they were trying to do. And I think the loss of that credibility by doing this in this way, so suddenly and without really well developed reasons for it,
Right.
is going to really be the US the effort of the US to kind of get its way in the world, to do the things it needs to do overseas is going to be very, really hard. Because, trust takes a long time to build up. But when you take it away, it's even, it goes down much further than where it began. It's broken, right? And you can see this in the most micro of settings when, with parents and children, and taken to the international level, the stakes become really high when something like that happens.
The stakes are really high, and it's for those of us who we feel it's our vocation.
Right.
It's heartbreaking. It's really, really heartbreaking because how can we say, "Please trust us. We're here to help you." It's not just about making a deal.
Yeah.
Not to get political, but that is how it
No, but
feels.
the funny thing is that that's the foundation on which deals get made.
Yeah.
When you know that you already have a reliable partner that you're working with and talking with in ways that go beyond just a transactional relationship.
Right.
When you need that transactional relationship for whatever reason it becomes much easier to do. And when you take away the foundations, it's much weaker. Going back to the tsunami for a second, one of the things that happened right away, right after that, was the US taking the lead in building an early warning disaster awareness system, right? And it was, as often is the case, it was repurposed defense material that became the basis of this new way of helping civilians. And there's nothing wrong with that. No, I think that that's the way in which technology has shifted over the last 50 years. A lot of stuff began, including the internet, began with the Defense Department
Right.
and then, sorry, the War Department, and then moved over to civilian life, but it's made our lives, much better.
Yeah.
I mean, the investments that DoD did in universities across the board, not just in digital stuff, but in everything else that went into there, has made our lives, and from our lives here to the rest of the world, has made it so much better. I mean, we wouldn't be imagining the same world that we live in today without that kind of investment, which took place quietly behind the scenes, but now is again in question or under threat.
And I think along those lines, exactly. So we talk about information sharing and how good we are a global community, whether we like it or not. And I think for the most part, it's been amazing, right? The things that we enjoy, we don't even know where these ingredients come from often, and vice versa. But also surveillance. So for again, health. Think about the pandemic, right? We now have lost at least 40, if you want to call them outposts, around the world that collected data and information about what was happening, right? Smallpox, Ebola, COVID, whatever it might be, that we now are going to not have that information. And that is really scary. And I don't think it's been thought through very well, to be honest.
No, I mean, yeah, I think I mean, we talk all the time about how this is a data economy, right? And people somehow seem to think that data is already always sitting there waiting to be used. But actually, there's a process of collecting the data
Yes.
and archiving it and ordering it and making it useful, without which all these big AI machines and all the rest of it cannot do anything.
Exactly. Exactly.
So just on this, I want to, just because I'm by nature a little bit perverse, I want to throw something back, not at you, but at the conversation.
Mm.
And one of the interesting side effects or unintended consequences of this withdrawal of the United States from this public diplomacy space, from the aid space,
Mm.
has been countries who have been saying, this is the trigger we need, or this is the stimulus we needed to start being more self-reliant.
Mm.
And at one level, at the level of the country itself, I can see how that makes a lot of sense. They've grown dependent on handouts from overseas or on help from abroad whenever they needed it. And they need to sort of dig in a little bit more and pull out these resources to do it for themselves. But at the same time, a world that is composed of independent, self-reliant countries, which have less and less to do with each other, is not the kind of not the kind of world that I want to be in. And it goes back to this question of how your neighbors help you when we have disasters, right? If my neighbor is so self-reliant that he doesn't think of me, and I'm thinking of countries and not people, is that the kind of world that we want to have? Or is that the kind of world we want to leave to children and grandchildren? And I think that the more it's not about countries not being self-reliant, but I think that self-reliance comes at a cost, where you think less or you're more indifferent to the worries and the difficulties that your neighbors are facing.
Oh,
So this was probably a perverse moment, right?
no, I think it's a really important point because what we're seeing right now is the US is saying America first.
Right.
So basically, we don't care about our neighbors. And most of us don't like that, right? It's just feels a little cruel and unkind. At the same time, I think it is an opportunity for many nations to say, wait a minute, what do we want? Because frankly, and I will say development, it's never neutral, right? It's about power. And so even under the auspices of humanitarian assistance, there are strings attached. There are always strings attached. And so I think it's an opportunity to rethink that and say, wait a minute, actually, under what conditions are we willing to accept these resources or this assistance or what have you? And what can we do ourselves? And I'm seeing so much that's online, right? That's being done and rethought. Even aid workers who've lost their jobs are like, okay, well, let's talk about communications. Let's talk about transparency. Let's talk about how we actually have a locally led agenda that is not, power top down. We're gonna. So I think there's opportunity there, and I don't think it will ever switch because humanity is beautiful for the most part, and people are good for the most part, and they want to, be there and help each other. So I don't know. Maybe I just feel like something good is going to break through this. I don't like the way it was done, for sure. But and there are legitimate consequences. As I said, people have died. Right. Funding is shrinking. There's a lot more emphasis on private, the private sector, which is not a bad thing, except for if it creates more debt for poorer nations and its people, right? Where they're focused more on how do I pay this debt rather than how do I improve education and health.
That's right.
So it's very, very complex, but I feel that those who are working on it are going to come up with something that is going to be better. I have to believe that.
No, I believe it too. And I actually think that in a sense, what you're doing is outlining the possible future path of the Global Technology and Development Program here at ASU. Because I think that, the idea that someone's going to parachute in and fix their problems is over.
Right.
Right. We're in a different space now. And if it's more a collaborative relationship between a group of people who have certain kinds of expertise, certain kinds of knowledge base, talking to people who already know locally what they need and what they want, that's the place I think we can start from and build a very different kind of system and infrastructure that moves everybody along. Maybe not always at the same pace,
Right.
but in the right direction.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think it could be exciting. It will be.
Let's make it happen.
Eventually. Let's make it happen.
Thanks, Holly.
You're welcome. Thank you.